Okay, part 7. Melkorn's Spring Prayer. Just as I'd requested, Clarissa began working in the castle with Feline. Matthias and Lorenz were instructed to continue working with the Knight's Order, while Brunhilde was taking Bertilde with her on trips to and from Groschel. All in all, my retainers were quite busy, and as expected, so was I. Ferdinand had been doing about half of the High Bishop's workload before his departure, and it wasn't an option to dump all that at Hartman. My intention was to complete it all myself, but that was proving even harder than I'd anticipated. Only as my time continued to slip away between discussions with Elvira about printing industry minutiae and preparations for our trip to Kernberger did it occur to me just how much Ferdinand had been supporting me when it came to the noble side of things. Each day was as frustratingly busy as the last, overrun with scheduling into the fine details. I know this isn't possible, but Ferdinand, please come back! I want him to come back. The poor guy doesn't deserve to be in Ahrensbach. He needs to be home where he belongs. On the day after the spring baptisms, we were going to receive a visit from the Gilberta Company. Because I was going to be ordering new outfits and hair ornaments, they had even requested that Mom be allowed to attend the meeting. In their words, they thought it best to change the designs and colors of the dyes to complement how much I'd grown. Craftspeople who hadn't learned how to interact with nobles couldn't be brought to the castle, but the temple had areas that commoners could enter. That was where they'd asked to meet, to my immediate agreement. Lady Rosamund, Hartman said, would the orphanage director's chambers not be more accessible to commoner craftspeople? Someone unable to visit the castle would surely struggle in the noble section of the temple. He made a reasonable point, so I agreed that I would order my clothes there instead. The fact that he always picked up on these little details made him feel so reliable, which compelled me to ask about permitting Camille to tour the temple, despite Fran and Zom having said that pre-baptism children weren't allowed inside. I would appreciate being able to grant the planting company's request if possible, I said. Hartman lowered his eyes in thought, then hesitantly said that would not be wise. Fran and Zom both gave looks of relief. Is that because pre-baptism children can't be let into the temple, I asked, quite aggressively. Hartman shook his head. No, my lady, I do not care about that in the least. Rather, we are receiving more apprentice blue priests, and Lord Melkor is going to be visiting with his retainers on a regular basis. If our visitors were put in a position wherein they were treated unfairly, would you be able to act as a member of the Archducal family? Or would you forget everything in your rush to protect the commoners? If you care for this planting company, I would advise not putting them in unnecessary danger. He's right, I would forget everything. If something were to endanger Camille, I wasn't at all confident that I wouldn't lose control to protect him. Seeing someone treat him as subhuman or expect him to follow unreasonable orders simply because he hadn't yet been baptized would cause me to leave noble etiquette by the wayside. I understand, I said. I will apologize to the planting company for my lack of strength. Camille's going to be so disappointed. If it's any consolation, I'm super sad too. As I drooped my head and continued my desk work, Hartman called my name, sounding a little apprehensive. It might be worth noting that it would be relatively safe if they came before spring prayer, which is when more nobles will start visiting. High priest! Fran and Zom exclaimed wide-eyed. Hartman responded with a casual, completely perturbed smile. There is no helping it, he said. My duty is to grant Lady Rosamund's every wish. Holy cow! Hartman's actually super cool! Though, he's still kind of weird, too. He is. Hartman, that was probably not a good idea. I know you want to grant her wishes, but, you gotta draw the line here. Fran and Zom were forced to accede to Hartman, so I received permission for Camille to visit the temple. That was great, but I was currently treading the very fine line that Ferdinand had drawn for me, and the thought of diverging from it made my heart race. A chill ran down my spine as I was struck with the urge to exercise restraint and not take the final step. On second thought, let us not. I do not want to risk endangering the planting company. Now that is a shame, Hartman said. Wait, why are you disappointed, I asked. I was giving up the chance to see my little brother by blood, but I didn't understand why Hartman would care. He gave me an exceedingly fishy smile, and a glint appeared in his orange eyes. Oh, I meant nothing in particular. He knows! He's gotta know! Why else would he be so okay with letting Camille, not all the children that are supposed to be wanting to be apprentices, but Camille in general? He has to know. He knows about all this. How did he figure it out, though? That's what I wonder. Did he see the magic contract that they had signed before making her Rosemine? There's no way. How? I am so confused. Does he know? And if he does, How did he figure it out? Because he apparently does not care. He loves it. He loves that there's even deep in layer to Rose's mind than he knew. If anything, that would drive her sainthood to even further heights. That she would give up everything to protect her family and be adopted by the Archduke. He definitely meant something. That look in his eyes is terrifying. Run, Camille, run! Our final conclusion was that Camille would tour the workshop only once he was baptized and formally working as a planting company apprentice. I was a little sad about this since I had been looking forward to seeing him, but it came as a relief to know that I was protecting my darling little brother from Hartman and the other nobles. I think if he does know the truth, I think he would love to meet Camille, but then again, that would risk Camille finding out about this whole thing, and we can't have that. Blessed be the melting of the snow. May the goddess of spring's boundless magnanimities grace you. It was the day of my meeting with the Gilberta Company, and I'd arrived at the orphanage director's chambers with only female guard knights in attendance. Karina had stepped forward and given the usual merchant greeting. Tuli was standing among the many seamstresses behind her, and so was Mom. It had been such a long time since I'd last seen her up close. Hey, Mom! Long time no see! Look over here! Oh, our H is net! Mom offered me a gentle smile. She was staying at the back of the group, but just seeing her face again warmed my heart. My eyes barely strayed from her as the seamstresses measured me all over. In the meantime, Lazetta, who was by this point very used to doing business with the Gilberta Company, spoke with Karina about what outfits I would need. Grisha listened carefully all the while. Might I assume that Lady Rosamund's spring prayer outfits will need to be altered as well, Karina asked. If we want to lengthen her garments, then we will either need to add some lace or replace the bottom part entirely. Indeed, Lazetta replied. In addition, would you be able to replace the buttons on the back with lace? Once the measuring was complete, I started to discuss hairpins with Tuli. Lenore and Judith must have been interested in our conversation. They were standing behind me, but I could feel their eyes on my back. Angelica was guarding the door, as always, so she wasn't nearby. Lady Rosamund, Tuli said, I see that your facial features have matured as well. Do you have anything in mind for your summer hairpin? Are there any particular flowers you would like me to use? My tastes are largely the same, so you may choose whichever flowers will suit me as I am now. If possible, I would like them to match the dyed cloth. The summer cloth had yet to be dyed, and my intention was to bring Mom into our conversation. Rather than coming over, however, she simply received the message through Tuli. She hadn't been taught the proper language and attitude to adopt when speaking with nobles, so this was the only way we could communicate when my noble retainers were around. I understood that there was no avoiding it. We couldn't risk her being rude or impolite in some way, but it was tragic all the same. At least I get to see her. I won't even get that much with Camille. Yeah, you'll have to wait until his baptism, which I'm assuming is right around the corner. Once we had finished discussing my hairpins and winter outfit, Monica stepped forward and requested that Karina alter my high bishop robes as well. The ceremonial robes must be completed before spring prayer, she said. As for the everyday robes, they would ideally be altered during spring prayer when she will not need them. Karina wrote everything down in her... Oh, she's got a diptych now! She was going to have her hands full with my needing to complete my summer outfits before the end of spring. Though the ceremonial robes shouldn't be too bad, she only needs to lengthen them, not make them anew. These are charms I am giving to all of my personnel, I said. I offer them to Karina and my Renaissance. Please try to keep them on you at all times. We are honored. I gave charms to Mom and Karina, thereby concluding our meeting. As the days passed, more and more carriages came to the temple, bearing furniture for the apprentice blue priests and shrine maidens who would be attending spring prayer. It wasn't long before I saw Melkor's attendants busily making sure that his furnishings were brought inside and arranging his room. Rose mine. Welcome, Melkor. 2 days ago, I had received word that Melkor would be visiting the temple to check on his room. His noble and temple attendants were busy discussing the matter, so I got him to offer 2 small face stones worth of mana to a divine instrument. He needed to begin with smaller amounts that wouldn't place too great a strain on his body. Once the mana offering was complete, we drank tea together. Leaving Melkor with an empty stomach would put him at risk of collapsing. In all things, negligence was one's greatest foe. The Alchemist Company has sent a chef to be trained, I said. He is currently at work in my kitchen, but he will start making food in yours once he has learned the fundamentals. Right. Also, I asked Father whether I could come with you for spring prayer. He said I'm not allowed to stay overnight. We needed carriages to transport our temple attendants, as well as ingredients and chefs to prepare them. It was costing enough time and money to prepare Melkor's chambers in the temple, so Sylvester had decided against spending even more to give him spring prayer accommodations. Plus, he barely has any retainers his age. Melkor had 3 elder siblings, so there weren't many student retainers left over for him to choose from. As I recall, there were only 2, both of whom were younger than I. He continued, I thought that riding on my retainers high beast and coming back the same day would be enough to get his permission, but he asked how I planned to go with that ceremonial robes to wear. Wolfried told me I could just borrow your blue robes, but... Can I? You can, but they're covered in flowers. Wolfried got his own robes made just so that he wouldn't need to wear them. Oh, flowers, Melkor repeated. He made a strange face and appeared to steal his resolve as he said, please lend them to me. Charlotte said that once I start participating in ceremonies, we'll be working too hard for me to sit back and observe. She told me I could take this opportunity to watch you perform, since there is so much I can learn from you. Wait, what? Charlotte's praising me? Melkor sees me as a role model? It was settled then. I needed to try extra hard. I got Monica to fetch the carefully stored blue robes and lent them to Melkor. So I can watch the ceremonies now, he asked. That's right, I said. Be sure to watch closely. You're the next High Bishop, after all. Days after Melkor's visit, Freytik was released. I climbed into my high beast and headed to the Knight's Order for the handover, then flew him back to the temple. Camphor seemed more pleased about having his colleague resume his own workload than Freytik did about having avoided punishment. Freytik thus became a blue priest who would need to earn his own money instead of receiving support from his family. He wasn't going to be much worse off, though, not when he was receiving funding from the Ob, income from the Harvest Festival, money for his work, and a little extra for transcribing books. I borrowed from the Royal Academy. That realization only made him more determined to work his hardest. Nice. This year, because he hadn't been afforded any time to prepare, Freytik was going to stay at the temple and do desk work instead of participating in spring prayer. After we leave, Wilfred and Charlotte will come to fetch chalices, I said. Please ensure they receive them. Wilfred and Charlotte were going to be visiting all the provinces except Kernberger. Freytik's duty was to get them the chalices they would require. It wouldn't be too complicated. Every count received 3, every viscount 2, and every baron 1. But he was likely feeling very tense about interacting with the archducal family. Hartman would have managed this without issue, but he was absent at the moment. He had gone with his family and Clarissa to the border gate to apologize to Friend-Beltag and collect his bride-to-be's luggage. The temple was going to be busier than ever during spring prayer, so I had contacted Florencia and asked her to return Feline to the temple for that period. I wasn't sure how Feline would feel about that. Apparently she was overjoyed to be doing transcriptions again. I totally understand. Transcribing is so much more fun than normal work, isn't it? Feline and Clarissa were meeting me in my library every now and then to give me reports, and it was clear to me that they were working hard. As an adult, Clarissa was going to be attending the Archduke conference, so she was trying to memorize as many documents that might help her negotiate with Dunkelfelger as she could. For your sake, Lady Rosemont, I will pour my heart and soul into ensuring that Ehrenfest receives the most favorable terms, she had said. Clarissa was fishing through papers with an almost demonic countenance and asking questions about even the slightest concerns, and her enthusiasm was apparently contagious. Feline told me that Clarissa had a habit of delving into the most trivial-seeming details which will really influence the younger scholars. It sounds like Justice to me. He does that too, doesn't he? Feline couldn't attend the Archduke conference, so she was primarily taking care of day-to-day matters. They weren't too unlike the work she did in the temple, so that she wasn't having much trouble with them. She also had plenty of opportunities to converse with Riarda, through which she had found out about a fairly intense shouting match between Wilfred and Sylvester the other day. Ooh! Riarda had said that such behavior was normal for boys who were Wilfred's age, but she was still very worried. I wonder, is Wilfred going through a rebellious phase? I wonder what the arguing was about. I want to know. Come on, give me a hint here. I was already well aware of how annoying boys could get when they reached a certain age. My time as a Rano had made sure of that. It probably wasn't the same for all boys, but they tended to adopt razor-sharp attitudes. It really made me not want to be around them. As always, spring prayer began with my seeing off the carriages, and then with my attendants, grey priests, chefs, food, and clothes. I watched as they shrank into the distance while Dad and a bunch of his soldiers guarded them. Haas's Monastery had already received word from the planting company that Melkor was due to visit. Everyone there was presumably busy with their preparations. From there, I returned to the High Bishop's chambers. Camphor came to see me before leaving for the Central District. I gave him a mana-packed face stone and the big chalice, then saw him off. It wasn't until after lunch that Melkor and his retainers arrived and we started toward Haas. Accompanying me in my pandibus were Melkor, one of his guard knights, Fran, Angelica, and a box of potions. Damiel and Angelica were guarding me for this year's spring prayer. Cornelius had wanted to come too, but I'd ordered him to prepare his estate for his new life with Lenore. He had tried to argue that I needed to bring as many guards as possible during this tumultuous period, but there wouldn't be enough room to accommodate so many noble knights, and I refused to listen to anyone complain about being too close to commoners. Cornelius really wanted to prioritize my safety over preparing his estate, but I wasn't going to accept that, for good reason. For good measure, I told him to return home to see Aurelia and her baby, then speak to Lamprecht about the current situation with Warfried. Being and Leslie meant our surroundings passed in the blink of an eye, and it wasn't long at all before we arrived in Haas. Is that Haas? Melkor asked. It's surprisingly close. It feels that way when traveling by high beast, I said, but carriages take a detour around the forest, so their journey takes much longer. On foot, it would take half a day. I slowly began to descend while repeating what my attendants had said about the trip. The weather was good, so the plaza had already been prepared, and the citizens were all there waiting for us. We landed in the plaza to excited cheers and fervent waving, a reaction that took Melkor by surprise. I prompted him to climb out of my panda bus and headed up the stage to meet with the mayor. Lady Rosemine, Rick intoned, we have been waiting for you. We exchanged greetings and I said, Rick, this is my little brother Melkor. He's here today to observe the ceremony. I told Melkor where to stand and signaled Fran with a nod. Spring prayer shall now begin, Fran announced. Town chiefs, come to the stage. 5 people holding lidded 10-liter buckets ascended the stage, then faltered. The large gold chalice, that divine instrument known to all, was nowhere to be seen. I looked between me and where the chalice should have been, clearly troubled. I stood atop the stand and chanted Erdagrol. At once the missing chalice appeared, and many of the spectators cried out in surprise. Not just the people of Haas, but also the noble retainers who hadn't participated in the Royal Academy's dedication ritual. I paid them no mind and started praying to Flutrain. O goddess of water, Flutrain, bringer of healing and change. O 12 goddesses who served by her side. A chalice flashed with golden light as I poured my mana into it. I continued the prayer, channeling mana into the vessel of all the while. The goddess of earth, Geduld, has been freed from the god of life, Avaglabe. I pray that you grant your younger sister the power to birth new life. I offer to you our joy and songs of glee. I offer to you our prayers and gratitude that we may be blessed with your purifying protection. I ask that you fill all the lives upon the wide mortal realm with your divine color. Fran then tilted the chalice, and as we had done the year before, poured a radiant green liquid into the town chief's buckets. Praise be to Geduld, the goddess of earth, and Flutrain, the goddess of water. Yep, homemade chalices work just fine. I gave a satisfied nod and then noticed that Melkor was watching me with concerned eyes. Rosemine, he said, am I going to be able to make a chalice by next year? Absolutely not, I replied. You must first obtain a staff at the Royal Academy. Besides, there's no need for you to learn to make chalices. Wilfred and Charlotte both use the divine instrument in the temple to perform their rite ceremonies. Amused, I produced my panda bus and climbed inside. Melkor followed with his guard knights. It was a direct path from here to the monastery. We offered our mana to the divine instrument the other day, remember, I said. If you make such offerings on a regular basis while praying to the gods, then the divine instrument's magic circle will appear in your head whenever you wish to use it. There are some among my retainers who have learned to use the instruments themselves. I can make Lindenstaff's spear now, Angelica interjected, her voice tinged with pride. She couldn't maintain the instrument for very long, but she wanted to use it to perform the blessing ceremony. Her hopes and dreams didn't end there, though. She also wanted to use that same spear to one day defeat Bonifacius. It was good to know that she had a lofty ambition to work toward. If you want to wield divine instruments yourself, Melkor, then you would need to work hard to compress your mana, I said, but offerings and prayer come first. I'll do my best, Melkor exclaimed, brimming with determination. It was a good, honest answer. Upon our arrival at the monastery, everyone came out to welcome us. I introduced Melkor, then we all went inside. The attendants will be preparing our rooms, so I decided to give a quick tour. Are there not any children here? Melkor asked. I shook my head. Even the youngest apprentices are close to coming of age. We often only exchanged adults between Haas and Ironfest, and even the former Haas orphan Marth was now close to coming of age. In other words, Melkor would struggle to find another kid. As a result of us Archduke candidates circling the central district, the harvest improved, and parents no longer found themselves needing to abandon their children, I explained. Had the Winter Purge not happened, I imagine there wouldn't have been many children in Ironfest's orphanage either. Oh, I see. I showed Melkor the boys' building where the adult soldiers were preparing to sleep, the workshop and its operations, and finally the great fields where the monastery farmed tasty vegetables. Melkor, this is your first time seeing a farm, is it not? I asked. This is how the produce you eat is grown. Vegetables from Haas's fields are positively delicious, and all sorts of goods can be gathered in the nearby forest. On that note, I think gathering in the noble forest would be a good experience for you. After finishing our casual tour, we went inside and had tea. The nobles and soldiers were seated at separate tables, but Melkor's retainers looked surprised that we were even sharing the same dining hall. Their eyes kept flitting between Dad and the other soldiers' table and our own. Priests has separate quarters in the Winter Mansion and the Summer Estates of Gibe, I said, but here in Haas we all eat together. At the very least, could they not eat at another time? One of Melkor's guard knights asked. Shut up. I gazed up at him with a smile. Their opinions are much too valuable for that. It was here that I spoke with the soldiers and asked for their support in ensuring that the lower cities and Twicon succeeded. Melkor's indigo eyes began to sparkle. His enormous desire to be useful meant he was hanging on my every word. It was our father who made this place, I said to him. One of Ob Ehrenfest's finest points is that he actually acknowledged the opinions of the people I encountered across the central district and in this monastery. Rather than disregarding the commoners for being beneath him, he used their perspective to strengthen the duchy. You would do well to emulate his good traits and become a high bishop who can understand and draw value from the opinions of commoners even after I depart. Melkor nodded solemnly. The disciples of the Gutenbergs. I brought Melkor to the table with Dad and the others, introduced him as the son of the Archduke and the next High Bishop, then said that he would be speaking with them as my successor. Ah, so Lord Melkor is the one who will take your place when you come of age, Dad said. That is heartening to hear. We have found it much easier to coordinate with the Archduke and the Knights Order thanks to these conversations with you. We found it very beneficial during the winter, and when the noble from another duchy came to the western gate. Dad then looked at Damiel, who was standing behind me. Might I use this opportunity to thank Lord Damiel in person? I don't know when I'll next have a chance. I turned around to see what Damiel thought. He seemed a bit troubled by the idea, but he didn't speak out against it. I returned my attention to Dad, ready to give him permission, only to find that he wasn't the only person now focused on my knight. The soldiers all stood up, then knelt before the two of us. Though you said you were only acting on Lady Rosemine's orders, Lord Damiel, we soldiers of the lower city hold you in the highest esteem. Thank you. What in the world happened? That's what I want to know. Come on, give us a side story for this. I want to know what the heck happened. Taken aback by this unusually intense thank you, I turned to Damiel and Angelica. In retrospect, there was no point in expecting anything from Angelica. Her head was profoundly empty, and her bright smile was a clear indicator that she had no idea what was going on. Guntry said, "What was it that Damiel did exactly?" "I performed my duty and nothing more," Damiel interjected. "If that were true, I doubt the soldiers would have thought to thank you. As your lady, I absolutely must hear these tales of your heroics." Dad shot a glance at Damiel, who clearly didn't want to discuss this matter, then began to explain. In the winter, we received a command to stop any nobles from escaping through the north gate. The Knights Order distributed plenty of magic tools for us soldiers to use, so many that, by the time they were done, we each had one for summoning aid. The issue was that any fleeing nobles could simply mount their high beasts and fly over the gate. Plus, even if we called for aid with our new tools, the north gate is at the very edge of the nobles' quarter. There was no guarantee that help would immediately arrive. During the winter, most of the Knights Order had mobilized for the purge. There were always 2 knights stationed at the north gate, but they were alone wouldn't have been able to stop the flood of escaping nobles. Thankfully, when the call for aid had come, Damiel had arrived immediately and before anyone else. "It wasn't anything special," Damiel said modestly. "I was in the temple preparing for the dedication ritual, so I just happened to be close to the north gate." Though he was doing his best to downplay it, Damiel had arrived in a flash and attacked the fleeing nobles from behind, supporting the commoner soldiers who had wilted in the face of their onslaught. He had come across as quite the savior. Thanks to Lord Damiel, none of the soldiers manning the north gate sustained any fatal wounds, Dad explained. He was also first to arrive in response to the west gate incident. The soldiers are all extremely thankful. I was surprised to hear just how much Damiel had done, and just how much trust and gratitude he had earned from everyone as a result. Moved, I asked the soldiers to resume their seats. Then I asked about the status of the lower city, and conveyed the Grashel would soon be reconstructed, which meant we were going to have enormous work orders for some of the craftspeople. Melkor listened as well with great interest. As I continued to speak with the soldiers, time got away from me. A retainer whispered something to Melkor, who then rose from his chair and announced, "I must be going now. I promised Father that I would return in time for dinner. Rosamund, thank you for today. I learned so much." "I was glad to see you showing such a thirst for knowledge," I replied. "This is my gift to you, my hard-working little brother. A protective charm. I'd given the charms for Wilfred and Charlotte to Feline so that she could distribute them before they left." "Thank you very much," Melkor replied, sounding all proper. "Also, I'll speak with Father about what the soldiers said today. If we could check the accuracy of my reports upon your return, I would appreciate that greatly. Now, if you'll excuse me." And with that polite farewell, he hurried up onto his retainer's high beast and went home. Wait, what? He wants me to check his reports? Am I just imagining it, or is Melkor way too mature? Am I actually doing a good job of being a reliable older sister? Yes, you are. He looks up to you so much. This is insane. I saw Melkor off, so in awe of his maturity that I started to feel uneasy about myself. The next morning, when as expected, I saw my attendants and chefs into a carriage, then watched as the Grey Priest started their return journey to Ehrenfest. "Soldiers," I said, "once again I must praise your excellent guard work. Please accept this token of my thanks." I started to hand money to each of the soldiers, then when it came time to give Dad his share, I discreetly slipped him a pouch containing 2 charms as well. He seemed to notice right away, and thanked me while sliding it into his chest pocket. Mom and Tully had already received their charms from me, and since the commoner charms were all the same, Dad could just consult one of them if he wanted any help using his. I was also pretty confident that he would be able to guess whom he needed to give the second charm to. Yeah, Camille! Just to make sure. From there, I continued to hand small pouches of money to the rest of the soldiers, keeping half an eye on Dad all the while. He barked for everyone to stand at attention, then informed them that their job here wasn't done yet. We will see them safely to the temple, he assured me. Thank you, Gunter. I wish you a smooth journey. I had only been brief, but I was glad to have had another opportunity to speak with Dad. I watched him disappear into the distance with his men and the carriages, then climbed into my high beast and made my way to the next winter mansion. After finishing my assigned portion of spring prayer and returning to the temple, I sent word to the planting company. I'd expected to need 3 days to recover from the trip, but I was feeling right as rain after only 2. My health really was getting better, to the point I no longer felt ill simply from traveling around. On top of that, I was only bedridden 3 times while we were traveling around the duchy. Good, you're getting better! Lady Rosemont, the Gutenbergs have arrived, Gil announced. Most of the luggage has been brought out of the workshop. We expect to be leaving soon. And once I exited the meeting room and started toward the front entrance with my retainers who were accompanying me to Kernberger and the scholars working in the printing industry in tow. Lisletta and Gracia were serving as attendants, Hartman and Roderick as scholars, and Cornelius, Lenore, and Judith as guard knights. Judith was still underage, but she was being allowed to tag along because Kernberger was her home province. Daniel and Angelica had circled the central district for this year's spring prayer, so they were taking some well-deserved time off. As for Ottilie and Feline, they were staying behind to keep Clarissa under control. Good luck! To be honest, I wish that Hartman was staying at the temple instead of coming with us, but he'd somehow managed to worm his way into our group. He was right that I probably need an arch scholar with me, but I'm still not too pleased about this. Also coming with us were Heinrich and the other lay scholars already familiar with the printing industry. By this point, I recognized all their faces. Muriella was going to be accompanying Elvira as her scholar. It was good to see that this printing and the knowledge she had acquired at the Royal Academy was benefiting her. I've been working really hard, Judith called to me with a proud smile, her orange ponytail swaying from side to side. Ever since it was decided that Kernberger would be our next destination, I've been gathering intelligence from Brunhilde and Lenore and making arrangements through Theodore so that everything was ready for our arrival. Judith went on to explain that she had told Keith Kernberger about the issues faced in Leisgang and Groschel, as well as how to avoid them. Keith Kernberger was very receptive, she continued, especially after learning that he would be blamed for any imperfections in the common or craftspeople's work environment. Brunhilde had apparently argued that there was no fault in the Gutenbergs' teaching methods or the tools they brought with them, indicating the progress made in Ilgner and Haldensdale as evidence. She had then stated that provinces only struggled to adopt the printing industry when they were unprepared or unwilling to learn. The problems faced in Groschel had apparently left a great impression on her. Kernberger has everything ready for the Gutenbergs to do their job, Judith concluded. Excellent work, I said. That is wonderful to hear. Judith puffed out her chest in response. Ehrenfest would only continue to improve now that we had more nobles bridging the gap between us and the commoners. We headed toward the front entrance to find the luggage all ready to be loaded and the Gutenbergs kneeling in very neat rows. Bennett was acting as a representative. He greeted me and then turned to look behind him. Lady Rosamond, please allow us to introduce the disciples who are accompanying us for the first time, he said. Blessed be the ways of Flutrain, the goddess of water who guided us toward this serendipitous meeting. I cast an eye over all those kneeling before me. The people behind the Gutenbergs were probably the disciples. They were all young boys who looked close to coming of age, and seeing them reminded me of Johann and Zach when I first met them. Ingo, Benno called. The carpenter stood up in response along with his disciple. Lady Rosamond, this is my disciple Demo, Ingo explained. He has been involved in the creation of your printing presses since the very beginning. He knows everything there is to know about their design, and making them comes as easily to him as breathing. Wow, cool. I took a closer look at Demo and instantly recognized him. He was one of the carpenters who had been with Ingo back when he set up printing presses in the Rosemont workshop in Haas's monastery. Demo, is it? I asked. I remember the extreme care of which you sanded down the temple workshop's first printing press. Also that we wouldn't need to worry about splinters. I was aware that Ingo had his eye on you, but not that you were now trusted enough to join him on these excursions. Ingo and Demo both stared at me as if surprised that I'd remembered the young disciple. It was a pretty unnecessary reaction, if you ask me. I remembered everyone who had been involved in the making of that first printing press, in the same way that I remember just how much its creation had moved me. I gave Demo the printing press schematics, Ingo said. I also taught him the process and how to coordinate with the workshops of the other provinces. As per your request, I'm going to stay in Ehrenfest and focus on my work here. Indeed, your task is going to require the collective efforts of every carpenter in the city of Ehrenfest. I trust you will once again demonstrate why I chose to give you my exclusive business. I also wanted Ingo to make bookshelves for my library, but that could wait. For now, he needed to focus on the competition between the carpentry workshops, so they all tried to make the best furniture for Grossel's high-class inns. They were going to be extremely busy in the lead-up to the autumn Entwickeln. Demo, I expect great things from you as well, I said. I will do my best to be recognized as a Gutenberg. It was good to see him so motivated. I gave him an affirming nod just as Benno called for Joseph. Ingo and Demo knelt down again while Joseph and his disciple stood up instead. Lady Rosemary, this is Horace, Joseph said. He is going to be replacing Heidi and me on this trip. Horace was a completely new face to me. He certainly wasn't the crass person I remembered seeing back when I visited Heidi at her ink workshop. He was chosen based on the fact that he can focus on his work without acting out or becoming absorbed in research, Joseph noted. He shouldn't encounter any issues when teaching others, and there is no risk of him becoming obsessed with new ink as Heidi would. Any research will take place back here in Ehrenfest, assuming any materials are brought back from Kernberger. Sending an ink fanatic like Heidi to Kernberger would have been much too dangerous, especially if she had gone without someone to rein her in. That was why Joseph had chosen Horace to go instead. He needed someone who could stand on an equal footing with the Gutenbergs and operate without constant supervision. His struggles as a husband were never seemed to end. Joseph, I said, allow me to congratulate you on your wife's pregnancy. Has she calmed down at all, I wonder? Thank you, he replied, then flashed me a look of complete exhaustion. If she were the kind of person to exercise more caution now that she's with a child, I would be going to Kernberger instead of Horace. It seemed that not even pregnancy could slow down the unstoppable force that was Heidi. Wow! I can imagine Rosemary being somewhat like that, too. She wouldn't be stopped even by pregnancy. That would be funny to see. She had even wanted to come here today to greet me. The only reason she had refrained was because Joseph and Lutz had desperately explained that pregnant women weren't welcome in the temple. Horace, for Joseph's sake, be sure to focus on your duties, I said with a smile. Do not become so obsessed with research that you forget to eat. Horace had seemed particularly tense, perhaps because he had yet to produce any meaningful results in the field of new ink. Seeing my smile made him relax, though, and he nodded in response. After my conversation with Joseph and Horace, it came time for Zack and his disciple to stand. Lady Rosemary, this is Seed, whatever. Zack said. He may not be quite as skilled as Danilo, but his personality makes him the best person to arbitrate between Johann and Kernberger. Seed appeared to be amicable enough, a desirable trait for someone who was good to support Johann as he taught everyone how to make metal letter types. Putting two quiet, stubborn craftspeople together would have been a recipe for disaster, so even the smallest disagreement would have likely spiraled into complete chaos. Instead, Johann needed someone whom he could lean on and who could make his life easier for the next half year. Zack continued, to be honest, Lady Rosemary, I simply think I could be of more use to you here in Ehrenfest. He was a creative through and through, and excelled in designing schematics, so he wanted to spend his time inventing rather than managing Johann's interpersonal relationships. Zack had accompanied us in the past. We wanted the nobles we were dealing with to recognize him as a Gutenberg, but he made a good point. He certainly would be better off staying in Ehrenfest and designing schematics. Perhaps I should give you a new order then, I mused aloud. What am I thinking? You must be busy enough preparing for your marriage. The new invention can wait until next year. Please focus on getting ready for your new life with your bride-to-be, and expect a flood of blessings on the day of your wedding. Zack was the first of my Gutenbergs to be getting married, and would need to put my all into blessing him and his partner. He smiled in response and said that he would make sure to brag about it when the time came. Seed, I said, opportunities to experience the craftsmanship of other workshops are few and far between. You can expect to find things in Kernberger that you would never encounter in Ehrenfest, Lower City. Please be sure to absorb as much as you can. Understood. The last arrives were Johann and Danilo. I was already familiar with Danilo. His name and progress had been brought up before, but this is the first time he was going on one of these trips. Lady Rosamund, this is Danilo, Johann said. I am bringing him with me so that he can learn to be my successor. Can I take this to mean he has finally mastered making letter types, I asked? I remember hearing that Danilo had just barely failed to meet Johann's expectations, but his presence here today must have been a good sign. Johann nodded. I intend to have Danilo do as much as possible while I take a back seat and focus on training Seed. Rather than being entirely focused on honing his craft, he was now putting in as much thought into training his disciple. Everyone had grown so much. We can now never have enough skilled smiths, I said. I wish you luck in training both Danilo and Seed. You are the oldest of your peers, after all. Johann gulped. He had always left dealing with the others to Zack, but then gave me a resolved nod. I turned to his disciple. Johann and the others have told me much about your growth, Danilo. Please continue to improve as one with my exclusive business. Ever since our exchange with these craftspeople from Groschel, I've been asking to travel to other places, Danilo said. Then, brimming with enthusiasm, he exclaimed, That day has finally come! Now that I've come of age and secured a place on this trip, I promise to do my best. Danilo was the very antithesis of the quieter and more introverted Johann. It was so much fun comparing all the craftspeople's unique personalities. This concluded our introductions. I distributed charms to the lay scholars as well as to the retainers and the Gutenbergs. The nobles received different charms from the commoners for obvious man-related reasons. Consider these protective charms a show of my appreciation for your consistent hard work, I said. Now let us prepare to leave. I made a huge panda bus and asked that the luggage be moved into it. The disciples followed the directions of the more experienced Gutenbergs and got straight to work. They appeared a bit hesitant, but the fact that they didn't kick up a fuss seemed to indicate that they had been told what to expect. The atmosphere was quite peaceful while the luggage was being loaded into my high beast, but then we took off. No sooner were we airborne than Danilo began flailing his arms around. His face looked in a silent scream. He had picked a great time to learn that he was scared of heights. Great! Johann looked at his disciple and then put his head in his hands and said, "You could stop looking out the window to start with." He seemed pretty exasperated, but that wasn't big of a deal. Poor guy. Oh boy. Dang, only 35 minutes? Really? Huh. Okay. I guess I'll keep going. Kernberger's Country Gate. Theodore, this is Judith. We're almost there. From the passenger seat of my panda bus, Judith sent an ordinance ahead to Kernberger. By the time she received a response and assertion that everything was ready for our arrival, the province's summer estate had already come into view. There it is, Judith said. The Geeves should be waiting for us in the side building for priests. We soon reached the summer estate and convened with Game Kernberger, who had been with him the two scholars in charge of the province's printing industry and several others. The Geeb looked and carried himself a lot like a knight, but he had a large muscular build and a rather stern face. His father and predecessor had very openly maintained that Bonifacius was best suited to serve as Ehrenfest's archduke, and it seemed that his passion had rubbed off on his son. The current Geeb Kernberger was said to hold Bonifacius in extremely high regard. So he's a musclehead, I guess. After we exchanged greetings, Geeb Kernberger started giving instructions. Fran, Monica, and the chefs were to be guided to the side building for priests, while the scholars by his side would show the Gutenbergs to the lower city. As I understand it, the Gutenbergs had brought much luggage with them, Geeb Kernberger said. I think it would be best for them to go to the lower city first. The chalices and our meeting can come later. What do you think? I agree, I replied. The Gutenbergs will surely want to see their new accommodations. I thank you ever so much for being so considerate. Fran and the others started moving our luggage, at which point Lizetta approached me. Lady Rosemine, she said, rather than venture to the lower city with the others, Grisha and I would like to prepare your chambers for dinner. May we? I gave them permission. As attendants, they had their own duties to take care of, and they were led away by members of the estate. In the meantime, I asked the Kernberger servants to help carry our luggage. Now then, let us go to the lower city. Kernberger's lower city had seemed so very large and populous from above, but actually traveling through it revealed that not many people lived there. An almost eerie silence hung in the air. If your Gutenbergs have any issues, they need to only let us know, Geeb Kernberger announced, then chuckled and said, we have more than enough vacant buildings, so we can have them moved to another house in no time. The accommodations we were shown to looked perfectly fine, and the Gutenbergs promptly began moving their things into their new home and place of work. Gil and the other great priests helped as well. Their movements were smooth and elegant that even without their robes on, they stood out as a little here in the lower city. Though by the time we come to retrieve them, they always blend right in. I did not expect such a massive city to have so few residents. Is there a particular reason? I asked the Geeb, hoping to kill some time. He gave me a warm smile, like an old man gazing upon his beloved granddaughter. This city used to be so much more animated. There was international trade abounding and a never-ending flood of people going to and fro. But then, long ago, the ruling Zent sealed the country gate. It was a time before Ehrenfest, I should add, that we were a province within the greater duchy of Eisenreich. I was taught the history of Ehrenfest, but the name Eisenreich received no more than a passing mention at the start, I mused aloud. I certainly didn't know it was a greater duchy. If the country gate hadn't been opened since the days of Eisenreich, then it means that it had been closed for at least 200 years. Several of the other gates were closed too, but that was only because the missing Grutterscheid was required to open them. The Geeb assured me that Kernberger had its own unique reason for its gate being closed, and that alone filled me with excitement. I could smell one heck of a story. Oh no, I'm starting to get too amped up. What should I do? Can you tell me more about these unusual circumstances? I asked, staring up at the Geeb. I couldn't wait to find out more, but then Lutz announced that everyone had finished moving the luggage. Geeb Kernberger snorted in amusement and gazed toward the far end of the city. Judith did mention your interest in the country gate. How about we go there after we discuss the printing industry? It should make an excellent backdrop for the tale. I'll need to get a notepad ready. I smiled and gave a simple nod, though on the inside my heart raced at the very thought of learning a new story. After showing the Gutenbergs to their new home, we visited the Geeb's summer estate. There, Benno and the planting company discussed the establishment of guilds with Kernberger scholars while I delivered the chalices to Geeb Kernberger and concluded spring prayer. This was an annual occurrence for me, so I was more than used to it. Now let us go to the country gate at once, Geeb Kernberger said. I climbed into my panda bus and we were off. Seeing the province from above for a second time, I couldn't help but compare it to Ehrenfest. The buildings were as one would expect, largely wooden structures built atop foundations of white stone, but everything else was backward. Back in Ehrenfest, reaching the Ob's castle would require one to pass the lower city and then the nobles' quarter. Here in Kernberger, however, the city's entrance led straight into the nobles' quarter and to the Gieb's estate. The further you ventured, the more common the city became. It intrigues me that Kernberger has its estate so close to the front of the city, I said. The estates in Ilgner, Leisgang, and Groschel all are much further back. A long time ago, visitors from other countries used to flock to Kernberger, Judith explained from the passenger seat. As a result, the inns for foreign merchants and the homes for the commoners doing business with them were built on the side of the city closest to the country gate, with the Gieb's estate securely behind them. That's what I was taught, anyway. All of a sudden, she pointed ahead of us. Oh, there it is! Can you see that gate with the weird hue on the other side of the white one made by the Ob? That's our destination. Beyond the white border gate, which looked just like the one leading into Ahrensbach, I saw another gate of a similar size. Wow, I murmured. The ivory structure made by the Ob are beautiful, but gates and walls made by the Zent are on another level entirely. The border gate in Kernberger's outer walls were pure white, like the walls around the city of Ehrenfest, but the structures beyond them blew me away. They shone with a faint mother-of-pearl iridescence and seemed to stretch in both directions, as far as the eye could see. It brought to mind the Great Wall of China, but rather than twisting and adapting to the continent's contours of the land, it continued in an unnaturally straight line. A single glance was all that was necessary to realize it was an artificial creation, and seeing it was terribly disconcerting. This border was definitely drawn by the first Zent. It was taught in geography that Jürgen Schmidt and the barrier around it was perfectly circular, like someone had pressed a round cookie cutter into a bigger continent, but this was my first time seeing the country's border gate with my own eyes. I had assumed it would be invisible like the borders and duchies, but even the walls were awash with a plethora of colors. The country gate truly is beautiful, Judith said. You can't really see it from within the city limits. The lower city's wooden extensions get in the way. I remembered visiting Kernberger during my first spring prayer, but I'd never seen the country's border gate before. The lower city's 4-story buildings were about as tall as the gate, so it couldn't really be seen from the Gieb's estate. Of course, it probably hadn't helped that Ferdinand had been in charge of greeting the Gieb, and most of my time had been spent drinking rejuvenation potions in the carriage, or being told to keep my head down. The grand white doors of the border gate were completely open, with what looked to be knights guarding it from the front. Farther beyond it were the iridescent, firmly closed doors of the country gate. They were covered with complex patterns and must have served the same purpose as the designs on Schwartz and Weiss's clothes, disguising the magic circles beneath. Is the Kernberger border gate always open like this? I asked Judith. No, today's a special occasion. According to Theodore, Gieb Kernberger asked for the Ob's permission to open it so that you could see the country gate. I'm so moved. I really wasn't expecting to see it up close like this. The border gate was said to be closed most of the time, meaning one rarely had a chance to see the country gate head on. Even growing up in Kernberger, all you ever see are the closed border gate and the walls around it, Judith grumbled. The border gate is basically the same height as the country one, so you need to stand at the perfect angle just to catch a glimpse of the colorful glow. As a kid, Judith had been desperate to see the country gate. Becoming a knight had simply been an excuse for her to get close to it. She continued, I got to see the country gate for the first time after getting a high beast in the Royal Academy. It was so impressive that I almost cried. By the way, this is true for most knights from Kernberger. I'm not strange or anything. Theodore's the same way. Judith's orange ponytail swished around as she repeated over and over again that she wasn't alone in her obsession. I could tell she was wishing she hadn't revealed her entire motivation for being a knight, and seeing her trying to backpedal was amusing beyond words. Is that so? I asked with a small smile, but as I recall, Theodore said that he wished to serve Gieb Kernberger as his father does. He was just acting cool. In truth, he feels the same way I do. Honest. He sounded so desperate that I decided to let it go for now. I'll double check with Theodore later. Lady Rosamund, remember to lend your high beast after the Gieb. Or land your high beast after the Gieb, Judith said. I did as instructed and touched down atop the border gate. A few Kernberger knights greeted us upon our arrival, waiting in a neat line, and among them I saw Theodore. I smiled at him, and then he smiled back. It was good to see him enjoying his apprentice work. Lady Rosamund, allow me, Gieb Kernberger said after I pulled away my panda bus, then slowly escorted me to the edge of the gate. Perhaps because we were so high up, the wind was strong and very chilly. The country gate glimmered in front of us. Border and city gates often contained several work and waiting rooms, but the country gate had looked to be only 3 or 4 meters thick. Plus, while the roof of the border gate beneath me was flat and large enough for several knights in their high beasts, its iridescent counterpart had a pitched roof. It hadn't been designed to be landed on. Beyond this point, we see what is known only to the knights of Kernberger, the Gieb explained, as we took one more step toward the edge of the gate. From there, we could see what existed beyond Jürgenschmidt, a sprawling ocean of sand. It reminded me of the dust that formed when something was completely empty of mana. I expected to see another country beyond the wall, I said. Didn't you say the Kernberger used to trade with foreign visitors? Did the country run out of mana and end up a desert? A small part of me didn't want an answer, especially when I thought about how much Arensbach was degenerating from its lack of mana. Maybe the neighboring country had turned to sand after the gate was closed? Geeb Kernberger shook his head and smiled. No, I don't believe so. The country gate is a massive teleportation circle for connecting two countries. One cannot pass through it without the Zent's permission, no matter how much mana one has. I only know this from tales that have survived the generations, but when the gate is open, there is an enormous magic circle that floats above it. Foreigners from other countries would teleport to Jurgensmith throughout the country gate, then pass through the border gate to enter Kernberger. In short, one had needed the permission of the Zent and the ruling Ob to access the province. Dang it. Was there ever anyone who's ended up stuck between the two gates, I asked? Perhaps someone who had permission from the Zent but not the Ob? Geeb Kernberger laughed. Maybe he hadn't expected such a question, or maybe he was imagining a merchant floundering between the two gates. Perhaps a merchant that foolishly existed at one time, but we have no records of such an entertaining tale or anything like it ever happening. Besides, anyone in that situation would need only return through the gate from whence they came. In that case, what stories can you tell me, I asked, taking my diptych out and eagerly looking up at him. We have many tales about the celebrations that were held to welcome the Zent. The country gate would be opened in spring and then closed again at the end of autumn, and the Zent would come each time to perform the process. Kernberger's lower city still passed down tales of spring from long ago. The season had once marked the beginning of trade for the year, since foreign merchants would pour in when the gates opened. So the residents had needed to prepare themselves. It followed that there was also plenty of stories about merchants hurrying home in the autumn. Those who had failed to leave before the Zent closed the gate would need to endure a harsh winter for which they hadn't prepared. There were plenty of stories sympathizing with them, making fun of merchants who had needed to spend all their earnings to survive the cold. The visiting merchants would also forget all sorts of belongings in their rush to leave, the Geeba continued. Jurgensmith has quite a few country gates, doesn't it? I asked. The Zent must have been very busy having to open and close them all each year. I feel nothing but sympathy for him. I ended up bedridden just from circling Airfest. The Zent had an astoundingly hard job. Even traveling by high beast, having to tour the country with a huge retinue of guards and retainers sounded exhausting. There's no need to worry about that, Geeb Kernberger cackled. To my knowledge, there are teleportation circles within each gate. They can be used only by Zents wielding the Gruchite. Oh, of course! The Zent had the power to create teleportation circles between duchies, and since the country gates existed outside of the Ob's borders, he probably hadn't even needed their permission to make them. Oh, is it just me, or is it having the Gruchite a game changer? It is! I really hadn't understood why so many people were up in arms about Charcoal not having the Gruchite, and it seemed to me that the country was doing at least okay under his rule. Now that I was finding out more about the duties expected of the Zent, however, I was starting to understand its importance. Still, why was Eisenreach, his country gate, closed? I asked. It must have been crucial for trade. Arensbach was maintaining its reasonably high rank almost exclusively because it had the last open country gate to Jurgensmith. Such gates were clearly of tremendous importance, so what had happened to warrant this one's closure? Geeb Kernberger pointed at the gate and said, "These doors once led to a country known as Bozjes, whatever. During those days, this land was a greater duchy known as Eisenreach, and its territory included most of what is today known as Frembeltag. The border also reached even further north than Haldensdale, into an area with a colossal mine which produced the duchy's exports. Eisenreach had sold ore from the mine and products made from the extracted metal to Bozjes, and it also used some of the metal to fashion weapons, which the people of Haldensdale had used to defeat Fabies. There is one key factor to note, the Geeb explained. Any country doing business with Jurgensmith wants one export above all else: face stones. They don't seem to exist elsewhere, or are exceptionally rare at least. So even the small stones from Fabies weak enough for commoners to slay can be sold for a considerable profit. This is my first time hearing about such countries, and my mind was immediately flooded with questions. How did they use face stones if they didn't have them otherwise? Did this mean that Arensbach was selling face stones to Lazanov? I noted them down on my diptych as Geeb Kernberger continued in a quiet voice. The duchy's decline all started with Bozjes convinced Ob Eisenreach to overthrow the Zent, he said. I stared up at him in shock, but he merely stroked his chin for a moment before continuing his tale. The Ob of the time wielded enough power to realize this goal, so he invited the instigation from Bozjes to Eisenreach and established a foothold in the sovereignty. His focus? Securing the Gruchite for himself. Ob Eisenreach had wanted to depose not a contentious ruler like a current king, but a true Zent who had actually carried the Gruchite. Bozjes had sent Eisenreach tons of provisions and other resources, while the Ob had used the teleportation circle to the dormitory They gradually moved knights and supplies to the sovereignty. Did nobody warn the Ob against taking such extreme actions, I asked. Many tried, but he ignored them all. His daughter sensed that he could not be stopped, so she flew to the sovereignty on her own, and in secret informed the Zent of the trouble that was brewing. Her news enraged the Zent, who immediately closed the country gate before returning to the sovereignty, and with the Sovereign Knight's order, launched a surprise attack on the Eisenreich dormitory. The onslaught continued until the Ob was dead, and the Eisenreich archducal family was executed for treason, as were all the important Eisenreich nobles who had moved to the sovereignty. What happened to the Ob's daughter, the one who informed the Zent, I asked? Was she also deemed guilty by association? She alone narrowly escaped execution. In fact, to show his appreciation for her loyalty and her decision to reveal her father's scheme, the Zent declared her the new Ob Eisenreich. That was a huge relief. Had she been executed as well, it would have left an awful taste in my mouth, but the Geeb's tale didn't end there. You must understand, however, that post was no great honor. The Greater Duchy Eisenreich was divided in two, becoming a middle duchy and giving rise to Frembertag. As for the Ore-Ridge Mountains to the north, they were given to Klassenberg. The daughter had also been engaged to a member of the royal family, but that union was swiftly cancelled. Instead, she was paired with an archduke candidate, more appropriate for a mere middle duchy. The daughter's life had been spared, but she had been made the Ob of a torn duchy that had lost its core industries. Her loved ones had also been executed, leaving the duchy without an archducal family to support it, and she had even lost her engagement to a prince. Worst of all, no matter how much Eisenreich had struggled, the Zent had refused to offer even the slightest assistance. Her assignment had come as more of a brutal punishment than anything else. Geeb Kernberger continued, Eisenreich was scorned as a duchy of traitors, and it quickly became a shadow of its former self. Losing ore as an industry also thrust farming into the limelight, so the Leisgang's power swelled almost overnight. Of course, there were Eisenreich nobles who were none too pleased about this. The archducal family and the key nobles had all been executed, but plenty more Eisenreich nobles had remained. Most had yearned for their former glory and complained ceaselessly about the current state of the duchy. And the duchy's nobles hadn't been the only ones to complain. The abrupt closing of the country gate had stranded countless visitors from Bozges. Those who had wished to return to their former home gathered in Kernberger, the province closest to the gate. Minstrels came as well, eager to hear first-hand accounts of such a grand event and spread them through song. Songs about the suffering of the Bozges citizens and the foolishness of Ob Eisenreich's decision had apparently become a tremendous hit all throughout Jürgensmith. The descendants of the late Ob Eisenreich formed a new archducal family. They grew up hearing of tales of their duchy's former glory, as well as the minstrel songs, so when it came time to choose the next Ob, they fell into two camps. 2 camps, I repeated, tilting my head at him. Geeb Kernberger offered a grave nod. One wanted to beg the Zent to reopen the country gates so that the Bozges visitors could return home. The other believed that the visitors should be punished for having corrupted the former Ob in the first place. The Archduke candidates had taken one of two sides, recruiting either those who wished to reclaim the duchy's former glory or those who thought it wiser to simply write out their punishment. This had culminated in a war that split the duchy in two. The Ob bemoaned her lack of power, the Geeb said. After failing to stop her father from plotting treason, she had then failed to keep her dead children and grandchildren from ripping the ailing duchy in two. She gave her position and status back to the Zent and requested that someone else be assigned to rule. The Zent had come to Eisenreich with the Sovereignty's Knight's Order and the first ever Ob Ehrenfest. Together they had crushed the Eisenreich nobles who had wished for the gate to be opened again. They used the Guterscheid to change the location of the foundation such that Eisenreich would never again seek its former glory. Its name was changed as well. It is said that Eisenreich Castle was once located somewhere in the province we now know as Groschel. With that in mind, perhaps Groschel was indeed a fitting location to house Lady Gabriel when she came from Ehrensbach. I wrote everything down and gave my notes a quick look over. These events don't quite add up with what I was taught. As I understood it, the first Ob Ehrenfest attacked Eisenreich and stole the foundation himself. That isn't entirely incorrect. He did come with the Zent and the Sovereign Knight's order to take the foundation from the ruling Ob. But it certainly does give a different impression. I shut my diptych with a snap and looked up at the Geeb. I happen to know about Eisenreich already. Many of the stories I collected speak of a foolish Ob who defied the Zent, but they used the name of a separate duchy that I'd never associated with Ehrenfest. In truth, I'd assumed that it was no more than an educational tale meant to deter people from committing treason. I never would have imagined that it was actually based on ancient Ehrenfest. I wanted to compare it with the stories told in other duchies. Does Kernberger have any written records of this story, I asked. It has mostly been preserved through oral tradition, with parents telling their children and Geebs telling those who served them. We have records, but they are rather old, and the antiquated language makes them difficult to read. They exist? I wanted to read these records from where the event had taken place, so I made my appeal without a moment's hesitation. Geeb Kernberger, would you allow me to read them? I am something of an expert when it comes to ancient language. I also wish to compare the oral accounts, the Archducal family's version of events, and the records that remain with the royal family. Grieb Kernberger took a step back. Of course if he wished. He seemed a bit put off, but I didn't care about it. He had given me his word that I could delve into the records. I thank you ever so much, Grieb Kernberger. I will need to transcribe them during my short stay here. The Grieb looked down at me quietly. And what do you think of the story? Well, it made me realize the true importance of the Grucheshite. A king without one cannot open country gates, redraw borders, or remake foundations. If an Ob attempted to depose our current Zent, he would not be able to respond as forcefully as the Zent from long ago. I can only imagine how much he is struggling to rule Jurgensmith. And it really hit home for me that the Zent's authority came from the Grucheshite. Because the current king lacked it, he had no choice but to endure slights against him and couldn't take firm action against greater duchies. Charcoal sure had it rough. Grieb Kernberger must not have expected my answer. He looked taken aback. It sounds as if you are focusing on King Charcoal specifically. Is there something wrong with that? I asked so quizzically. The Grieb sighed and looked at me intently and said, allow me to change the question. What quality would you say is required of Ob Ehrenfest, who must rule a duchy that can no longer use its country gate after an act of treason against the Zent? What quality? I repeated. This must have been one of those questions that I couldn't afford to get wrong, so I paused to seriously consider my answer. Could it be the capacity to understand that foreign trade is no longer an option? A skilled Ob would surely focus on improving the duchy without it. Grieb Kernberger gazed toward not the gate, but the sprawling city in the opposite direction. As he who rules Kernberger, it is my belief that Ob Ehrenfest is expected to serve the Grucheshite-wielding Zent without allowing others to influence their position. That is why I remain uneasy about Lord Wolfried taking the role. He is too easily swayed by the Liesgangs, nobles of his own duchy. Wolfried was working so hard to earn the Liesgang's support, but his efforts were having the opposite effect on Grieb Kernberger. That reminded me, one of the Grieb's sons served Wolfried as a retainer. Did you hear something from your son by chance? I asked. Nothing that you haven't already been made aware of, I imagine. The Grieb then fell silent and showed no signs of elaborating. He couldn't provide any more details, but his source was already clear to me. I would need to gather the information I required myself. I'll need to listen to Cornelius' report later. Lord Wolfried may have my son in his service, but that doesn't mean he automatically has my support, the Grieb said, his voice now low and stern. I straightened my back. This was a discussion about my fiancé, and it was my duty to support him. Before I could speak, however, Grieb Kernberger continued. Tell me, who convinced the Ob to marry Grieb Grossel's daughter after he so foolishly and obstinately refused to take a second wife? Who decided to give up members of their own retinue to support the archducal couple, her own retinue, and even retreated to the temple to avoid any unnecessary conflict? Lady Rosamund, I will ask that you become the next Ob. No! No! Sylvester's decision to take a second wife was entirely the result of Brunhilde's go-getting attitude. Riarda had returned to the Ob's side entirely of her own volition, and Clarissa was only working with Feline under Lebrecht because taking her to the temple would have been a political disaster. Grieb Kernberger, I am afraid you are mistaken on several counts, I said. The Ob came to his own decision to take a second wife after considering the duchy's needs and circumstances. In fact, I even tried to stop Brunhilde, knowing that the Ob had eyes for only his first wife. The Grieb received this news with a look of surprise, so I pressed the attack. I explained why Riarda and the others were working alongside the archducal couple, but even then he didn't seem convinced. So you say, Lady Rosamund, but the royal family trusts you more than they do any other Ehrenfest archduke candidate. Grieb Kernberger, I said, broadening my smile. I started my life in this world as a commoner. I was not going to become the next Ob Ehrenfest. Is it not obvious that my brother, the next Ob, would seek to obtain the Liesgang's support? Furthermore, were I to accept your request, would I not be allowing another person to influence me, thereby demonstrating my unworthiness to rule? How are you hoping I'd answer exactly? The Grieb's eyes widened, and after a moment of silence he laughed. I now understand your position, Lady Rosamund. The wind is quite strong here. Let us return to my estate. I will ask for those records to be dug up for you. At last he seemed to have realized that he would never convince me, no matter how much he tried. I produced my high beast and climbed inside, relieved. Soon after our return to the Grieb's estate, the records I'd sought were delivered to me. I skimmed the old-looking boards, then Broderick and Hartman helped me transcribe them. We needed to work as quickly as we could. We were going to leave Kernberger's once Benno and the scholars finished their meetings and negotiations, and the Gutenbergs set up their new place of work. This process became quicker each year as the scholars working in the printing industry adjusted to their jobs, so we really needed to hurry. The surviving records weren't collections of stories, but rather simple descriptions of what had occurred each year, focusing in particular on the lives of the former Eisenreich nobles and those who had been unable to return home to Banshees. They seem to be transcriptions of reports that had previously been given to the Zent. As expected, these records don't quite match the oral history. The events were covered impassively and in chronological order, which made everything seem much drier than in verbal accounts. The records did, however, elaborate on the role that Bajis had played, which had received almost no mention in my history lessons and the Gieb's retelling. In the years before Eisner reached his treason, there had apparently been a massive increase in the number of merchants visiting from other countries, with the same merchants visiting several times from spring to autumn. This had also aligned with an increase in how much food was traded. After the gate was closed, however, the gate was closed because only the absolute richest of the Strand's Bajis merchants had been able to afford citizenship. Most had become traveling merchants and scattered to the four winds to earn a living. That makes sense. Not having citizenship means they wouldn't have been able to rent homes or stores, find employment, or get married. How many years had passed since Otto first told me about traveling merchants? Vague memories of all that he had said to me came to mind. Perhaps he was a descendant of the Bajti stragglers? Maybe? In the end, we managed to complete our transcription with time to spare. It soon came time for us to leave, so I returned to the temple with Benno as per usual. I asked him to deliver some of Kernberger's specialty materials to Heidi in her ink workshop. We discussed the training of those from Groschel, then I saw him off. And thus concludes my spring prayer, I announced to Zom and Fran upon returning to my High Bishop's chambers. I should have a bit more free time now. Lady Rosemine, Zom replied, we will soon be accepting the apprentice blue priest, so things are sure to get busier again. Oh, but you and Fritz took the lead in directing the Grey Priest who will soon be their attendants, did you not? I would assume those preparations are already complete. Zom nodded with a wryly amused smile. The chef's hat we had received from Frida and the Grey Shrine Maiden's assistants had already begun their training, which meant there was more food in the orphanage. We could also expect new vendors to come by the temple, as ingredients were being brought from stores favored by the home families of the apprentice blue priests. Their rooms now contain furniture and study implements, Zom informed me. We have arranged their schedule so that they will have as much freedom as possible while adjusting to the ways of the temple. Lady Feline even offered to advise us on what is needed to educate noble children. Despite my absence, Feline had taught my temple attendants all sorts of things. Well, the preparations have all been made, I suppose I shall welcome the children, I said. The temple will get much busier starting tomorrow. I wanted to be around to keep an eye on things when the apprentice blues moved into the temple, which was why I'd asked for them to stay in the prayer room while I was away for spring prayer. I sent an ordinance to the castle and asked for the children to be brought over by carriage. That should take care of them. As for the rest... Now then, Cornelius, how is Wolfried doing, I asked. It was a question that I hadn't been able to get posed in the Gieb's estate, where anyone might have been listening. All of my retainers twitched, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly became a lot heavier. Uh-oh. Everyone was hiding their true feelings behind a mask of composure, but I started to feel tense. Is it as Gieb Kernberger said, I pressed? Is he being unduly influenced by Leisgang? Cornelius gave a slight smile and shook his head to calm me down, then answered in a bright tone. It seems that rather than being influenced by them, he is caught between his pride and duties. And what does that mean exactly? I'm not sure if I follow, but is there anything I can do? I asked, my brow furrowed. Lampret did ask for our help. I don't mind assisting them in ways that don't interfere with my temple duties, but I don't know what I can actually do. Cornelius shrugged. To put it simply, Lord Wolfried will need to settle these matters himself. It would be best for him if he did not interfere. I gave him a searching look. Sure that he was hiding something from me. Is that really true? Did Lampret say that? I then turned to Lenore, who had been with him. Wolfried seems to be unsatisfied in various regards, she added with a smile. Largely as a result of the Ob speaking about his Leisgang task and taking Lady Brunhilde as a second wife. He has not voiced these concerns to the Ob, but he does often mumble them to his retainers. To make matters worse, though we expected this from the start, the Leisgang nobles whose provinces he visited from spring prayer did not have any kind words for him. They spoke at length about why you should be the next Ob. Oh, that's putting a knife in there and twisting it there. The key members of the Form Veronica faction had all been punished in some form or another, so it didn't surprise me that the Leisgangs had chosen to demean Wolfried at every opportunity. Presumably through obscure noble euphemisms. He was, after all, the only Archduke candidate to have been raised by Veronica herself. It wouldn't have been easy on my schedule, but perhaps I should have found a way to accompany him on those visits, I said. I might have been able to protect him. Maybe I could have managed with enough rejuvenation potions and some carefully timed visits? Or timed rests? Cornelius grimaced and shook his head. That wouldn't have helped. If Lord Wolfried wants to become the next Ob, he needs to follow the Leisgangs himself. Having to rely on you would have wounded his pride and undermined his attempts to improve his reputation. Wouldn't you agree? Perhaps, but the Leisgangs wouldn't have been so openly critical. I would have been able to help Wolfried get in their good graces, but I could have at least stopped them wouldn't have been able to do that, but I could have at least stopped them from disrespecting him so much. Cornelius raised an eyebrow at me. This isn't something for you to worry about, Rosemine. The temple isn't in an unfortunate state with so few blue priests, and you already have enough on your plate. Plus, it was Lord Wolfried who offered to circle the province for spring prayer so that he could meet with the Giebs. He could have just traveled around the Central District and then had you accompany him on his visits to the Lias Gangs, but he opted against it. I knew that Cornelius was trying to comfort me, and even though he was making some very reasonable points, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was being too hard on Wilfried. In that case, I said, perhaps I could advise him that he doesn't need to improve his reputation with the Lias Gangs right away. The Ob may need to piece our shattered duchy back together post-haste, but Wilfried should have plenty of time to gain support before he needs to become the next Ob. Maybe he would feel more at ease after being told that he didn't need to rush. Lenore gave me a troubled look. I agree that he does not require their support right away, but I believe it would be best for you to keep your distance from him when you can. According to Riarda, he's at a complicated age. If you interfere now, it might end badly for everyone. I cocked my head at her, not really understanding her concerns. Hartman stepped in to explain for me. Lenore is worried that Wilfried, still wounded by his failure to obtain the Lias Gang support, won't be able to take your advice sincerely, especially when you are the candidate they want as the next Ob. Oh, right. Even my best advice might come across as an insult to him. If my retainers were being this vocal, I could only assume that Wilfried was losing his mind over his inability to secure the Lias Gang support. I wanted him to overcome that misery and get back on his feet, so I made a mental note that I was determined to follow. Avoid unnecessary contact with Wilfried. Oh, the epilogue! Okay, that's going to have to wait until the next video, and I'll see you on the next one.